Hi, Abtans.
Namaste,
All
sir.
well?
Yes.
Namaste, namaste.
Namaste, Ambassador Sam.
Thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Namaste, welcome, swagatam to all. We are all gathered here today for the book launch of Dr. Lavanya Vemsani's book, Feminine Journeys of the Mahabharata, Hindu Women in History, Text and Practice. As you will be aware, this is part of a whole series of seminars on Indic feminism run by Indica USA. We will launch the book. The High Commissioner will launch the book. And after that, Dr. Vemsani and I will have a conversation about the book, the voices of Indic women, and much more. But first, I would like to invite Sri Harikiran Vadlamaniji to introduce Indic Academy and Indica USA and its works to all of us. He describes himself as an entrepreneur, seeker, activist, and aspiring artist. The force behind Indica, the force behind so many multiple movements for an Indic renaissance. So we would like to hear from you. Over to you, Vadlamaniji.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We are very, very honored indeed with your presence. We're deeply grateful to you for making time and attending this book launch. It was about, I would say, around 2.5 years ago, when this phrase, Indic Feminism, was first coined by us at Indic Academy. We have several Devis amongst our group where we actively discuss, and we felt that we should counter the narrative, the Western narrative of feminism and the lens with which they view Indian women through a Western lens. So this adjective, Indic feminism, was first coined. We were planning on a conference in January 2020 in Delhi. And then COVID happened, and Indica USA, the team took it up. And we had the first event ever on this topic of Indic feminism. Of course, there are certain views on feminism is alien to Bharat, and therefore, why should we use this word? But I think it's in a way to communicate that by adjective, the quality of Indic, when you put that quality before the word feminism, our opportunity to clarify the misconceptions arise. And therefore, that gives us as an opportunity to clarify. And this word now is becoming a mainstream after our seminar and now this event. And I see that this is also used on the social media increasingly to communicate our perspective. At Indic Academy itself, we have in our governance structure, we have created a ESG Council. And in that ESG Council, we have Sumedha ji as a council member specifically to address the issue on clarifying the correct Indic perspective of women. Ever since we set up this and she joined us, she has immediately gone with her word. And we have actually announced 10 scholarships and research scholarship on a monthly basis. And work is progressing, research is progressing, and she will highlight to us the kind of progress that is there in her opening remarks. There are two more things that we are doing. One, we are doing an anthology of Indic women of substance. And here again, our idea is to bring out the unknown, lesser known characters in our history, lesser known stories in our history. That anthology is progressing very well. We had a phenomenal response. And the curator for this is Shivkumar, G.V. Shivkumar, and we will be publishing it in the next few months. Apart from this, specifically to what Lavanya ji has done, there's another anthology that we are working on the lesser known characters of Mahabharata. We did one anthology called the Unsung Valor of the lesser known battles in Kurukshetra, and that was a huge success. So now we are doing lesser known characters of Mahabharata, and in that anthology, there are again women characters that are going to be dealt with in that anthology. Aditi Banerjee is the curator for that. So if you actually see the trajectory of the narrative as far as issues relating to women is concerned, first we have defined and we put a label, and then we're doing research. We have somebody steering this initiative, and we are publishing stories. And then Lavanya ji is our family member. And we have a very strong relationship over now 5 years. When she came to Hyderabad and she visited us, and we had a talk with her. She's a member of our family. And so it was a very happy thing to know that she's been quietly working on this book on the 11 women characters in Mahabharata. And so it's just a very exciting thing for us at Indica and Indica USA, in fact, which is now spearheading the initiative on the Indic feminism aspects in particular. Our team, Avtans, Ram, Nishant. So it's actually from if you look at how the trajectory is going, you can see that this is again we are advancing the narrative. We've also given a grant to Neha Srivatsa, who has established a not-for-profit called Shaktitva. So that's the other initiative that we have. We have given an initial grant to her. So this is the kind of steps that Indica has been taking, especially in relation to the women issues from an Indic perspective. I would like to just briefly introduce my colleague, Sumedha ji. She's actually from the IRS. So some of you might not know, but she worked 15 years in the IRS. She's an author, columnist, and speaker, born in Patna, and educated in Lady Shri Ram College, post-graduating in sociology in Delhi School of Economics. Then after 15 years at the IRS, she switched. A moment of epiphany has happened that she found her calling. And then she started research in the Mauryan period. So if you just do Google of Mauryan period, Mauryan history, her name will be the top coming up, because now she has made such an impact. She's written a book, and now she's expanding it into more on that front, which she'll brief you about. She works in the area of translating and explaining the epics and bringing ancient Sanskrit Prakrit literature to English-speaking Indians, and also in the area of gendered analysis of ancient India. She lives with her husband near Geneva, and both her children live in the United States. So with those few words, I thank my colleagues in Indica USA for making this happen. You are consistently at it, and I'm really grateful to you for this. And I thank the Ambassador, His Excellency, for gracing the occasion. And more importantly, I warmly welcome you, Lavanya ji. This is indeed a great pleasure. And I do hope, I already am requesting a lot, I'm getting a lot of requests. I do hope at some point in time, we will be able to distribute this to more number of people. I know it's an academic book. It is priced in a particular way because of the press, and I understand that. But we are hoping that we will cross over the hurdle. We have 1,000 reviewer club. We distribute books. This is a book that we would like to promote aggressively to all the audiences in India and around the world. So we are hoping that we would be able to publish it, in fact, under the Indica label for the Indian market. And with those few words, I very warmly welcome you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind words, Hari Kiranji. You overwhelmed me, and you've set the background, and you've told us what all this is about and why all of us are engaged in this endeavor of Indic Renaissance, of Indic Feminism. So let us now move on to what we are going to do today. It is my great pleasure to welcome the High Commissioner of India to Trinidad and Tobago, Shri Arun Kumar Sahu. He has, I will give you a short introduction of the High Commissioner. He has studied linguistics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, war in the modern world from King's College London, and is from the 1996 batch of the Foreign Service. He has represented India across the world, from Canada to Beijing to London to Tehran. And as you can see, it is our pleasure and our privilege to have him with us here today to launch the book. You will be interested to know that within this bureaucrat beats the heart of an author and a poet. So he is a poet. He knows 4 languages. He writes in Odia. His selection of Odia poetry and prose has, and also I think poetry written during the COVID period has just been published. So this is a multifaceted personality, and no doubt he is absolutely the best person to launch this book of Lavanya ji's. And it is very nice of him to take out the time and to be here with us to launch this book. Thank you very, very much, Mr. High Commissioner. Now, I will also briefly introduce Lavanya ji before we formally launch the book. It is an equal pleasure to welcome her. She is a PhD in history and religious studies and a professor in social sciences at the Shawnee State University. There is such a long list of her achievements and her writings that I will be able to give you only a few. She is the president of the Ohio Academy of History, co-founder of the American Academy of Indic Studies. She is also the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Indic Studies and managing editor of the International Journal of Indic Religions. There are also so many other things that she does. She has many publications and books to her name. And this book is her latest offering to the academic world. So the book, Feminine Journeys of the Mahabharata, Hindu Women in History, Text and Practice. Now I would invite the High Commissioner to launch this book and to release this book and to show us what the book actually looks like before we go on to discussing it. Over to you, sir.
So what do you want me to do? Just give a remark?
Yes, please. Your remarks would be most welcome.
Okay.
And
Okay.
perhaps you see the book.
I
Nishant?
think they'll show the book.
Yes.
No? Okay. Let me Pustak Vimochan of Feminine Journeys of the Mahabharata, Hindu Women in History, Text and Practice by Dr. Lavanya Vemsani. Good morning to all of you who are participating from India in this part of the world, and good evening to all in India. I am honored to have been invited as the chief guest at the Pustak Vimochan or book release event of Feminine Journeys of Mahabharata, written by Dr. Lavanya Vemsani. I thank the Indic Academy, especially Sri Aptans Kumar, ex-Genuite, who convinced me to be in such an event beyond my expertise purview. My interest, more than shedding light on the book, is to listen to the author. Nevertheless, I'll attempt an opening remark. Let me quote the author. Quote, Mahabharata cannot be imagined without Draupadi. So also, the Nalopakhyan cannot be imagined without Damayanti. Similarly, the story of Savitri, Madhavi, Satyavati, and Amba provides impactful journeys of the women of the Mahabharata. Page 244. That is the beauty of an epic, its universality and timelessness. The creator or creators of an epic and the narrator or narrators of the epics in a civilizational or cultural setup stitch each character with such unique attributes that each plays a unique signifier in making a representative whole. Epics are stories of unparalleled bravery of both the major and minor characters. The tales are transmitted orally over generations and performed before a particular cultural group or community audience, well before getting codified. These are about people who many a time are endowed with supernatural power. As the verses are told and retold, cited and recited, they become cultural signs and signifiers for a wider society or societies. Epics have evolved in various ancient civilizations and cultures, such as the Greeks, the Romans, the Anglo-Saxon, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, and the Indians. They have been influencing human thought and existence over centuries across cultural and geographical boundaries. Epic creation is a continuum. As we speak, humanity is creating and recreating strong imaginative stories and visuals with powerful protagonists in an exquisite style that could maybe over centuries attain the status of future epics. In an increasingly technologically connected world, it is only natural that these new characters in any part of the world will influence people in other regions. In India, we have a rich oral tradition of storytelling. Popular stories have regional and linguistic variations since we are a cradle of languages, thoughts, and philosophies. We have many Mahabharatas and Ramayanas, uncountable Puranas, lyrical ballads, folk tales, mythical stories, drama, and legends. Songs sung by mendicants, leelas, doll dance, street theaters, and plays. Diversity of thoughts and traditions have been enriching them every day. Local conditions, habits, and practices influence every story. It is not easy to analyze the characters of these texts in their context of time and space using limited modern literary or cultural theories. While doing so, one needs to be acutely aware of the spatial and temporal exclusivity. It is a commendable effort for Dr. Vemsani to deal with 11 feminine characters of the Mahabharata in one book. It is brave. Mahabharata is such that many books could be written on any one character. It is also an arduous task to keep in mind these popular narratives' local and regional variations. Nevertheless, I hope Dr. Bhemsani's book will provide necessary insight into some of the feminine characters of the Mahabharata to modern readers and academics, especially those who are remote to the Indian tradition and those born to Indian ancestry outside India. I congratulate Dr. Vemsani for her effort and wish her all success. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to give opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Thank you for those words of interest, of appreciation. And I hope you will enjoy the conversation that follows, because we will be talking about Lavanya ji's book. We will be talking about all the fascinating Devis who are part of our own traditional sources of power and strength and inspiration. So I hope that the conversation will be interesting. Lavanya ji, I hope that you and I can have a very interesting conversation now. I have called this seminar a breath of fresh air for a reason. The Mahabharata, as the High Commissioner pointed out, has had ample number of things written about it, on it, stories from it, so many things. However, it has been seen that our own voices, the voices of 663 million Indian women, that does not come through. Sometimes the view is through a Western or Christian lens. Sometimes the view is through a Marxist, feminist lens. But where are we? Where are the Indic voices? Where are the indigenous voices? Where are the people who are part of this tradition? What about the way we look at it? What about the way Draupadi or Kunti are inspirations to us? So it is here that this book strikes a very important and innovative and fresh note. So what Lavanya ji has done is removed herself to a critical distance from the received tradition of analyzing the Mahabharata. And she has looked at it from very different eyes, from the eyes of a woman who is part of that same tradition. And therefore, the whole idea has been to reject accepted narratives and to look at everything afresh. The book is about 11 selected Devis, feminine heroic journeys from the Mahabharata. And she has taken 3 or 4 sources of the Mahabharata into consideration. The main one has been the 1883 to 1896 translation by Kisari Mohan Ganguly. Then Harivansh, the works of Kalidas, Bhas, Sri Aurobindo, Rabindranath Thakur have also been analyzed. And very interestingly and hearteningly for me, also the Telugu Mahabharatam. Why am I excited about this? Because I think that the Bhasha traditions of India are completely neglected. And we have the Mahabharata and the Ramayana in every language of India. But where is the serious analysis which takes into account all these different regional views, which have a deep civilizational unity, but also a beautiful regional diversity? So it is wonderful to see that the Telugu version of the Mahabharata has also been taken into account. Also, importantly, she has taken into account many versions, folk tales, Mahabharata tales, folk practices, festivals, all the things that are part and parcel of the normal lives of women in India. So putting all this together, she has come up with her version of the stories of these 11 heroic journeys. So this is something that Indic feminism encourages. This is something that we are trying to do. read the originals, analyze the originals from our own point of view, from the Indic Shastric point of view. And as we will see as we go on with this conversation, there is a very big difference in the Shastric Indic point of view and the Western received, understood a narrative that we are all part of, especially in the English speaking world. So Lavanya ji, my first question to you would be that we know that in the Indian subcontinent, there are three main story clusters, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata and the Bartaha. Now of these three, you have chosen the Mahabharata story cluster and you have chosen 11 selected stories or journeys from it. Why did you feel impelled to write about these Devis from the Mahabharata? What made you choose the Mahabharata and the Devis that you selected? Over to Lavanya ji.
Thank you, Sumedha ji, for the kind remarks. Before I answer, I will also offer my namaste to His Excellency Ambassador Arun Kumar ji for launching the book, and for Hari Kiran Vadlamani ji for his remarks, and Avatan Kumar ji for organizing everything. And for Srinivas ji, Nishant ji, and Sumedha ji for joining the panel. I am really honored to be in such an excellent panel discussing the book. Thank you all for being here. So why the book and why the Devis, right? It's Mahabharata is everywhere in India. India is Bharat, right? It's Mahabharatam. Mahabharatam story is actually woven into the story of India. The story of India is the story of Mahabharata. The roots are in Mahabharata. So everyone knows it, and it's in India and it's woven into its history. So it's an important book that we all need to know, we all need to understand. And as you have so eloquently noted, it hasn't been analyzed with our perspective, no Indic perspective. It has been analyzed, but the Indic perspective has not been applied. So I wanted to begin it, and I wanted to begin it with the epic, the most well-known and most representative and most cultural part of Indian life. So Mahabharata is the subject, and the goddesses. Goddesses have been analyzed. There were long studies on a number of the goddesses, Devis, but the understanding has always been from Western perspective. Western analytical lenses have been applied. It was misogynistic, to say the least, highly misogynistic. Primarily, it's either Freudian analysis or labeling, classifying and labeling. So apply the Freudian lens, which doesn't really apply to any women or any women's stories, and then label them in a derogatory labeling. So, you know, the breast mother, or, you know, tooth mother, what does that mean even? So it had, the classification has been, you know, I'll say the classification has been wild. They call the goddesses, you know, wild goddesses, domesticated goddesses, but the classifications and labels had been wild. So it's important that we look at the stories, we look at them afresh and apply the Indic lenses. They have never been wild, they have never been labeled. They have always been seen and received and revered the way they were presented. They were not an anomaly for us. So it's important that we have to look at them the way they are represented and presented to us. It's the least we can do. So I decided to study them, and I decided to bring out what the actual stories, the original stories tell us. So.
All right. So that's good for us. So then you wrote this book and all of us can read it. So that was a wonderful thing. Now, I think, you know, although you've written extensively, it's a dense book and there are so many details of the 11 selected Devis, let us discuss a few of them to give people a flavor of what they can expect when they read your book. So I read your book with great interest. In fact, I reviewed it in detail, and I found everything that you had written so interesting. I will just have to pick out a few things which kind of stood out, the Devis who stood out. And as you said, I mean, as everyone says, there can be no Mahabharata without Draupadi. So Draupadi, born of fire, fiery, the cause of so many things in the Mahabharata, the wife of 5 husbands, perhaps the only Devi who is the wife of 5 husbands. Although, it should be noted that polygyny was not all that absent in India in the past or in the present. And there were these customs which were spread out, especially in the northern part, in the Himalayan part of India. But in the Mahabharata itself, and even in the Ramayana, in any of the epics, she's the only Devi who has 5 husbands. She's the only Devi with such a very difficult and such a very up and down kind of, no, all of them had up and down fortunes, but she's the one who fought them with the greatest amount of courage. You've written about Draupadi that it is through her veracity and courage that the lineage of Pandu survived the Mahabharata war and is blessed with progeny to continue in future generations. And her deviance is noticed in every event of her life. Would you like to just say a couple of words about that? And then we'll move on to another of the characters, another of the Devis. Lavanya, do you remember the same thing happened when I was speaking to you yesterday? I had said characters and you had immediately marked it out and asked me not to use this word. And yet this word slips out. Why so? Because I have also, spent my entire life in the Western narrative tradition, and it has only been about 15-20 years of my own journey into recognizing our own Devis. So labels, as you say, and words which we should not use, which demean and belittle our Devis, they still stick. And that is why we need books like yours. So a few words about Draupadi, perhaps.
Thank you, Sumedha-ji. Yes, we were brainwashed for a long time, 3 generations. So we cannot, escape it so quickly.
Yes, exactly.
We're trying. That's what matters. So
yes.
Yeah. So Draupadi, as you said, is central to Mahabharata. You cannot imagine the story of Mahabharata without Draupadi. Draupadi is at every major event. Her wedding is the beginning of the Mahabharata. Pandavas went into exile. They're still living in exile. They are too scared to come out of their exile. And they show up at the Swayamvara in exile. They were still seen as in their disguise. The Draupadi did not notice they were princes or Pandavas. So her marriage is the beginning of the journey. It brings them out of their exile. And they come out of their exile, they're received. Until that point, they're not received. They did not have their position accorded to them. At this point, of course, there is an announcement made and Dhritarashtra makes a mistake of thinking his son actually won Draupadi, so announces a grand reception. And it happens that the reception is given to Pandavas. So this brings them out of the exile. At the same time, it also brings them out into the open and in a grand position, right? They are now seen as the great princess of Pandu. And at the same time, they're bringing Draupadi, seen as a great achievement. So the beginning itself is with Draupadi. And of course, now they get their part of the kingdom. Of course, they're given, as useless part of the kingdom, but still, of course, they have Draupadi, they can do anything. So a nice palace is built. Duryodhana doesn't have a good experience there. He faces humiliations at every turn. It's here that Draupadi is remembered in the local stories more. Local stories and of course popular stories attribute Duryodhana is humiliated that Draupadi laughed at him and he feels humiliated, and that's why he planned the dice game. Mahabharata actually has a series of humiliating events. He felt humiliated when Bhima gave him a change of clothes when he fell into the pool. He felt humiliated when he knocked himself into the wall. So he felt humiliated by 3 or 4 events. But it's only the Draupadi event that is remembered in the popular stories, in the Telugu Mahabharatam, as well as in popular stories of the Mahabharatam, regional stories and popular stories. So the next event also is centered on Draupadi, and then they're going to the exile. Of course, Duryodhana could have just sent them to the exile, but no, he also wanted to include Draupadi. So it tells us how important she is to the story. She's central. She has to go to the exile. It's his wish that she has to go. Why is that? Right? She's a stronger woman, that he really does not want to see her stay back in the kingdom. He also wanted her to leave along with these others. And of course, when they come back, the Duta Upakyana, and Krishna goes to do the, peace effort. But it's Draupadi that says, no, peace effort is useless. We should not do it. Even if we do it, it's not going to be fruitful. So Draupadi speaks her mind. In every event of the Mahabharata, it's Draupadi who speaks the truth. When they lost the dice, she speaks the truth. When they come back, want to make peace, she speaks the truth. When the war begins, of course, she also speaks the truth again on many things as the war goes on. And when Aswadama comes back and kills her children, the only hope left for them is the pregnant Uttara. And upon her request, Krishna comes and resuscitates the child. So from the beginning to the end, every event has her imprint. Without her imprint, the event is not there. So it shows us how important.
If I could just interrupt you here, it's interesting that in telling us Draupadi's story, you have in fact told us the entire story of the Mahabharata from the beginning to the end. Right. So, it's self-evident that her story becomes the story of the Mahabharata, and therefore the story of our roots. And you've also brought out her links with Kali and Durga. There's one link of Draupadi, which you have also briefly mentioned, but which has been lost in popular imagination, because the Devi herself, Shachi, the wife of Indra, she has more or less been lost. The time period of which in which I researched, the modern period, the past, Shachi was the warrior goddess of the Rigveda. And she was the warrior goddess. She was not subservient to her husband, but the warrior goddess of the time. And so the links between Draupadi and her strength, courage, and fieriness, and Shachi, who used to be worshipped along with Indra in the Dhraj Makha, which was celebrated around the same time as this. This is in fact the time of the Indra Dhraj Makha. So Draupadi can never be obliterated from our minds, although the links with other Devis changes as our own perceptions and our own practices change. We are Sanatan Dharma, thousands of years. So of course things change. And the way they change, so do our perceptions of these Devis change. I have translated the Ramayana, and I am very fond of saying that it is a palimpsest. It is the same for the Mahabharata. It projects everything that we are onto the story itself, and that is why it is ever alive, and that is why it is ever interesting. So from Draupadi, maybe, we can go on to, and since you have very generously left the selection of the Devis to me, I am going to move on to Damayanti. And why Damayanti? Now, Damayanti is someone who takes part in the action in a really very kind of tangential way. But I find her very interesting because she is a direct link, to something which is the third big story cluster, the Badkaha, which is from where the stories of Aesop's fables and Vikram or Vetal and Panchatantra and everything have come from there. So we have lost the original, and now we only have the Katha Sarit Sagar to tell us what the stories were. Damayanti also appears in those stories. And she appears as part of a whole series of such feisty, strong, and very, very smart women who outsmart all the things that ill fortune throws in their way. And it links back to something which is called the Gatha Narshamsi of the Rig Veda, which were stories of people, not just, heroes like Sri Ram or Sri Krishna, but normal people. Links up to so many other stories like the story of Moondev's wife, but I won't go into all that. I find her a very smart character, a very smart person who uses her wits, who uses her understanding. And look at the way, but please tell us her story and how she managed to, get her husband, lose her husband, and get her husband back.
Yeah, right. She's inspiration. She is very strong woman, but she is very subtle. She is not overpowering. She appears very very subtle. She doesn't even speak much. She's quieter. But when it comes to taking action, she's very smart and takes the action precise action. If anybody else was in her position, they would have lost her mind. But she actually becomes sharper as she goes through these difficulties, right? Her husband, of course, was taken over because he gets to marry this beautiful woman, and not they don't get Kali and Dwapara. That the time, the concept of time is also very important, and it's discussed in the Mahabharata. So we won't launch into that because we are speaking about the day.
Leave something for people to read.
Yeah.
Let them be intrigued by this. So people who are listening, there's a very intriguing discussion of Kali Yuga and time and what was the impact on Nal. You must read it.
Right. So Kali Yuga, the god of Kali Yuga, of course, decide to take a revenge on them, and then afflicts Nala, makes him lose the dice and become exiled and all that. Damayanti, of course, she loves him, so she wants to follow him and help him. Of course, as for Nala, she also loves her, so he doesn't want her to live in the forest and have difficulties and hard life. The first day they go, it becomes evening, and then they relax on the edge of the forest, and he feels sad to see her resting on the grass and stones there. So he decides to take off, leaving her when she's resting there. So he leaves her. And now it is her turn to go alone to find her husband. Not only that, to find her husband, but to bring him back. So here, her husband is abducted, but not abducted by a demon that you can find and bring back. But here, he's abducted by Kali. How can you bring your husband back from an invisible enemy? The Kali is impossible to find and fight. So how you can find him, right? So this is the feat that Damayanti accomplishes through her mind. She goes through this forest. She faces the difficulties, a snake attacks, of course, a thief attacks, and then she meets the sages, and she still goes through all these difficulties, and then meets the traders, caravan of traders, and then comes out, and then reaches her aunt's kingdom, Chedi, in the south. She goes from Vidarbha all through the forests in the central India, in the middle of India, and then reaches the south, and Chedi kingdom, and that's where she recovers. And then her father sends the messengers to find her, so she was found and then brought back. Now she actually makes a plan, which is, I think, is ingenious. She actually composes a poem. So she sends the messengers to all the kingdoms. They're not asking for Nala. They're not asking for Kali, but they are reciting this poem. So if anybody recognizes this poem and then responds, then she will know, right? How smart is that, right? Find an invisible enemy.
This is actually a feature of women in that Katha Sarit Sagar and Bad Kaha, you know,
I know.
making puzzles, poems, and things which only the intended recipient can understand and nobody else can understand, which
Right.
ties into the whole, our whole tradition of puzzles and our whole tradition of, you know, questions which only specific people can answer. But do go on.
Right. Of course, you know the rest of the story. So Nala finds response, but doesn't want to send the response, so he goes away. But they bring back the message anyway. She understands. She understands that Nala is hiding there. But how can you bring him out of the hiding, right? So Nala is under the influence of Kali. So Kali is making him stay. And of course, he also looks different now, right? So because of, yeah. So how do you get him back, right? You know, the only thing she can do is announce a Swayamvara, right? So this shocks Nala, right? She's announcing a Swayamvara, right?
See, isn't that the smartest way to get him back?
Yeah, I
You
know.
look at the way her mind works, the smartest way to get him back, because this will deliver a shock which he will not be able to withstand.
Right.
His wife trying to marry someone else.
Right. And she sends the message only to that kingdom, right? This king must come, so the message goes, and he's the one driving the king, right? So anyway, they drive, and on the way they exchange their skills. Nala exchanges his skill of driving chariots, and the king, of course, exchanges his skill of dicing. And then they reach here. Of course, Nala still doesn't want to bring him out, right? You know, he's still thinking, you know, oh, I lost my form, I lost my mind, I lost my kingdom. Why go and, you know, make her cry? So he doesn't come out. But she has to bring him back, right? So she sends her maid with another riddle, another small poem that he has to respond, and she also sends her children with the maid. How smart is that? Of course, as soon as he saw the children, he cries, and we know for sure. So and she also understood for sure. So then they talk, and they also talk to the king, and then explain to him the plan and everything, and then it's a happy union. But the part of her journey, how she went through the forest, how many difficulties she faced, and how she stayed as a maid in her aunt's kingdom, and then how she came back, and how difficult it was for her to bring back Nala, and how she composed all these riddles. That's what shows her strength, her strongness of character, and that's what is inspiration.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I find it very interesting. One of the skills of Nal is that he's a fabulous cook. So
Right.
Nal and Bhim, both of them are masters of Pak Shastra. In the Mahabharata, the two best cooks are these two men, Nal and Bhim. So, you know, we had in the past a very well-rounded character for both men and women. Both of them were supposed to be good in the 64 arts, and Pak Shastra was one of the 64 arts. And Nal was one of the greatest exponents of Pak Shastra. So the story of Damayanti is, you know, very fascinating. There's so many interesting things, so many changes of scene, the jungle, and then you know, from the forest to the kingdom to the palace. And as you have noted across the book, these feminine journeys have often taken place in exile. The heroines have gone to the forest. Their journey to the forest, the events in there have played a very big role in the way that their lives have further unfolded. And in fact, you have made 5 stages for almost all these devis, except some to whom it doesn't apply. So, you know, maybe before I go on, I just had a small question. You have divided the stories of our heroines and devis into these stages. I wondered why, I mean, did you think of also using the 4 ashrams as a structure, the brahmacharya and grihast and vanprast and sannyas? Did you think about that? Because you have made a different structure. So did you think about using the traditional varnashram dharma and 4 purusharth structure?
I did not. In fact, Varnashram Dharma, the Ashram Dharma is actually part of the stories. All of the stories actually mention them taking sannyasa. They don't mention these other because they're obvious. Their brahmacharya, their grihastha, their marriage, all that. They specifically mention the sannyas, the final stages of their life. But I did not think of it that way because I was trying to focus more on how the story evolves, how the journey begins, and where the journey becomes deeper. So I was trying to analyze the deeper meanings of the journey. Especially the exile. The exile is almost like a destiny in these stories rather than and it is actually an impactful journey in the life of every woman that we have studied in this text. The men, when they are sent to exile, they become desolate in most of the events. The women actually stay strong and they think strong and support the men with them. This is the case with Kunti. This is the case with Draupadi and Damayanti, as well as Savitri. The men look quite dejected, desolate, or quite innocent of what is going on, while women actually take charge. So for me, this is more important than looking at the different stages, that focusing on their actual deeper journey and deeper meaning of the story. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you. So now maybe we'll again go on to a couple more of the heroines. So one of them that you have written about, and which I found your choice very interesting, she is often ignored as one of the significant devis of the Mahabharata. That is Ganga. Ganga Nadi and Ganga Devi. So she is actually one of the matriarchs, as you put it, because it is through her that that whole family is established and the family is protected. See, I myself was born on the banks of the river Ganga. I was born in Patna, and I'm just back from a visit last week. So Ganga, at the time of the Mahabharata, she is venerated today as much as she was then. She's part of the warp and weft of life in India, in the subcontinent, even today. And her presence in the Mahabharata, therefore, seems very natural. And significantly, she is a woman and she is a river. So this kind of merges human and non-human forms in that beautiful way, which represents our own philosophy. Because we don't differentiate between humans and non-humans. Ek anshen sthito jagat. So tell us a bit about how you thought while writing about Ganga.
Right. She's the most fascinating Devis, the Ganga Maya. She fascinates you. When you see her, she fills your eyes. She spreads that far. And she's, as the Mahabharata and the Vedas describes, she's wider, deeper. She is beyond your vision. So that's what she is in the Mahabharata also. She is described in deeper terms. She is described in divine terms. At the same time, she's also described in human terms. So she appears in both forms. She appears as a divine woman and appears as a human woman, and of course also appears as the waters. When they go to do the final rites for Bhishma in Varanasi, Ganga is the water. That's where they go to do the final rites, as all Hindus do. So she comes out as the Devi. To express her anguish. So she is the waters there, and then she comes out as a Devi. And within the story also, she is the waters there and she comes out, right? So her part of the story is the same way as she is depicted in the epics and the Vedas. She helps everyone get through her sins. Same thing happens in the story in the Mahabharata also. She is trying to help Bhishma and his brothers who were cursed. She was also helping the sages that were also cursed. So she was taking her form. She's taking the human form to come down, but she is actually helping the people who were actually cursed. The sage was actually cursed because he was looking at her, but she is helping him to get through her sin. So she is the purest of the mothers that are described. She helps even those that actually behave.
There is only one time when anger overpowers her, when Amba is praying that she can get the power to kill her son, Ganga's son Bhishma. That is the only time when anger overpowers her and she makes Amba into half woman and half river.
Yeah,
See, that's the part of the story of Amba, which is often not told, about how through different lives and through different forms, she continued her idea of revenge on Bhishma, and she traversed through everything, through multiple identities, through multiple genders, and then finally achieved her end. So that is called really, like, focus on revenge. And that is what Amba was really like. Although it would be interesting to discuss Amba, I think another very important Devi is Madhavi, because her story is unlike anyone else's. It is completely different. So do tell us the story in short, Lavanya ji, because it's a very different story and it can actually be misconstrued and misrepresented in so many ways, as you have pointed out in your book.
Right. It was misrepresented. It was misrepresented in Hindi and Telugu translations and Hindi theater, the story, how it is represented. They only represent the first part of the story, but don't represent the second part of the story. So anyway, the story actually is in the form of, in the category of devoted son and devoted daughter category. So Mahabharata has some stories where the daughters or sons would give their sexuality or sacrifice their sexuality for the pleasure of their father. This happened in the case of Bhishma, and it also happened in the case of Yayati. One of the brothers of Madhavi sacrificed their sexuality for his father. And Madhavi comes also in the same category, devoted daughter who sacrifices her sexuality for the sake of his father, but not for her sake. So the story is narrated in such a way that she is participating in this journey as she was given as a gift to fulfill, of course that is another story, but anyway, she was given to fulfill somebody else's Guru Dakshina. So he was supposed to be giving Guru Dakshina. So anyway, she was taken to 4 kings who make a 1-year contract marriage with her and then pay these horses to be paid for the Guru Dakshina. That's not the important part for her. The important part for us is that she went through these 4 kingdoms and she had these 4 sons for them, but it's not for her. She is this devoted daughter who was doing it for the wishes of her father. She doesn't want her father to lose his word, because his father made a promise to this other guy that my daughter would be able to fulfill your wish to get the Guru Dakshina for yourself. So she helped with that. And then when she comes back, of course, the father wants to get her to marry, but that's not her wish, right? She is a devoted daughter and she has her own wishes for herself. Her wishes for herself is to live like a yogi. She wanted to become an ascetic and live the most difficult ascetic life. So even though she went through the life of luxury, not in 1 kingdom, but 4 kingdoms, that's not her wish. Her wish was to be this ascetic. So she remains an ascetic. And then when her father falls out of the heaven because his good karma is done, then we understand her story. Her real story and her real goal comes out here. So here her dad comes out and then her children were actually performing an yajna, and then they encounter him, and they want to give their yajna phalam, their good merit to him to go back to the heaven. And he doesn't want to take because he thought they were strangers. Now she comes, Madhavi comes and tells, you can take, I'm your daughter, and you can take the phalam from your daughter's sons. That in other way, you can take from your daughter.
The concept of the Putrika Putra, which has been important, throughout history. In fact, even in the Gupta dynasty, finally, it was Chandragupta II, who was the Putrika Putra of the Lichavis, who just took over the entire kingdom and merit of the Lichavis and merged it into the Guptas. Just a historical example, by the way, of principle of Putrika Putra, that the daughter's son.
Yeah.
Part of the Indian family, and everything which impacts that family is possible through the Putrika Putra. Lavanya ji, I find that scene where her father and her brothers have organized this huge swayamvar for her, and she comes there and she throws her swayamvar mala into the forest to signify the fact that she wants to live like the deer. So I find that an amazing scene.
Right.
One, because in spite of having 4 children and 4 husbands in turn, she is still expected to make a good marriage, which she doesn't want to. And also the fact that by nature she is a yogini. And she rejects everything. She finally gives her good credit, her children's punya to her father, so that father can, Yayati strikes me as a really, really selfish man. Whether it be true or whether it be Madhavi, he just wants to take. He just wants to take everything, and he seems to get it all.
From his son, from his daughter, from his grandson.
From his grandsons. He is one of the most selfish people you can imagine. But he seems to have got away with it.
He has devoted sons, devoted daughter, and devoted grandchildren.
And nobody knows why they are so devoted.
Like we don't know even. Yeah, we don't know why Bhishma is so devoted his father either, right? So,
true.
So devoted sons is also a part of Mahabharata, and devoted sons and devoted daughters.
We have
of course,
grandmothers. One more Devi. So maybe the last choice I will leave to you, Lavanya ji. Who would you like to discuss? We have time to discuss one last Devi, one last journey.
Why don't we discuss Amba? Because she takes us on a exceptional journey.
Okay.
Through different forms, different genders, different, she actually questions every aspect of life. The life as it is questioned by her. The gender, the life, the marriage, the kingdom, everything is questioned by her, and she comes in a new form. So
yes.
Yeah,
her story is also an amazing one, a different one, a completely unique one, if you think about it. And we can connect it to that dialogue between Sulabha and Janak in the Sabhapar, where Sulabha tells Raja Janak that the self is not gendered. The essence of every human being is not gendered. And you can see that in the story of Amba, because she is a woman, she is a man, she's even half a river. So not only is the self not gendered, the soul, the Atma can take any form. So yes, Amba's story is indeed very, very interesting. Maybe you would like to tell us in short?
Amba's journey is exceptional, as you said. And also it demonstrates the idea, the concept of personhood. The personhood is different from the person. The person is the person, but the personhood is represented by the gender, but the gender balance. Everybody has this gender balance, the feminine and masculine within the personhood. It expresses in its own way, and India always accepted this multiple aspects of gender, because the personhood, the multiple nature, multiple aspects of personhood are always accepted. The gender is not a fixed category. It's not a binary as we see it in modern world. It was not so in Indian traditional culture and in traditional lore. So the same thing is seen in Amba's case. Of course, begins very innocent, young woman, yanked out of her Swayamvara. And of course, she goes back, she tells the story. Of course, she is brave, right? You know, the other women do not talk, but she speaks her mind, tells the story to Bhishma. And Bhishma, of course, you know, understanding man, so he lets her go with paraphernalia and help and everything. She goes, but you know, the person she thought would marry her was not brave enough to marry her. So she has to leave. But she finds that, you know, Bhishma was the cause of her anguish, the breakup of her marriage. So she develops this anger on Bhishma. Excessive anger, of course, is going to give anybody difficulties. That's what we see in this story. She goes through a lot of difficulties, goes through asceticism, of course, meets others who try to help her. You know, Parashurama takes her side and goes to war with Bhishma. So anger, of course, doesn't bring victory, and anger only brings difficulties. So that's what we see. And of course, she practices asceticism. And Ganga, this is the only time she gets upset, right? She never shows her angry, never saw her get angry in any story. This is the only story she gets angry and then, you know, curses her to remain, you know, half river and half human. Of course, the fluid form of personhood again. Anyway, she self-immolates and then she takes birth next life on the blessings of Shiva. And she was able to change her gender, become a man, and then of course, accomplish her goal in the next life. But the part of her life in the next life also, her journey through being born as a woman and then becoming a man, and then of course becoming a warrior, strong warrior that can take on Bhishma. You know, the only other warrior that was driven by Krishna is Amba. So the other than Arjuna. So we know, of course, her difficulties are recorded, and her difficulties and her journey is also a record of how we understand the personhood and gender, the personhood and life and gender. So it's a very, very important story for India as well as for modern world.
Yes, indeed. And you know, gender, sexuality, if we are to, we've discussed some of the specifics. If we are to just in conclusion, look at the larger issues of analysis, the larger issues of understanding, this has been a pivot around which all these wrong interpretations flow. Gender, sexuality, the understanding of sex in Western Christian narratives, the understanding of sex or kam, in our tradition, they are very different. We have dharma, kam, moksha, so we believe in an equilibrium of all forces, of all energies. But Christian thought, Christian theology has a slightly unhealthy relationship with sex, with procreation, given their ideas about Eve as the original sinner, procreation as something which carries along that sin. So then, you know, as you have, you said in the beginning, and as you have written in the book, all these really very peculiar ideas about categorization, about labeling, what have you said, overemphasis on sexuality, as if that's the only thing that is important in these women's lives, then making them objects instead of real living, breathing devis, labeling them, then problems with theoretical frameworks. And you know, this of course, truth goddess, breast goddess, this really, I mean, I cannot tell you how to get
most derogatory terms.
So, you know, this wild goddess and then domestication, because it just doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. But then, you know, so many things are to blame for that, Lavanya ji. Most people rely on that sacred books of the East translation. So, you know, translations by dead white men who knew very little what they were translating, and they knew very little what they were talking about. But we seem to still insist on that. So therefore, you know, we have to go back to the originals. We have to think in our own ways. So what was your journey like? Because as an academic, you must have also read the same things that everyone reads. those same translations, those same things. So what was the catalyst which made you think differently?
Yes, we all go through the same journey. I went through the same journey. I read the same books. I thought the same thoughts.
Yes.
I was taught through school the same thing, the wild goddesses, how they were
As you said,
tamed.
all of us are brainwashed in the same way.
So, yeah, we have been through the same thing. But as I started reading the originals, for my PhD in religious studies, I started reading the originals, the Mahabharata and the Harivamsha. The Harivamsha, many sections of it I needed to translate for my book on um, Balarama. Yeah. So Balarama, I worked on the thesis and I wrote, but while I was working on Balarama, what I found was there were all these stories about Ekanamsha that were not included in the main work. And how she is actually, Ekanamsha is Subhadra. Subhadra is, of course, one of the matriarchs of the Mahabharata. So how she is separated, Ekanamsa is not seen as one of the aspects of Devi, but she's separated, she's included as Kali, and in the category of wild goddesses. But she's also Subhadra. She is also the matriarch. So she is also the same goddess that represents the feminine, homely power. When
So
there
it
is
was the reading of the originals which struck off this thought process in you. I find that very significant, and that is why anybody who's listening, anyone, please learn Sanskrit, learn your own mother tongue, and read all our traditions and compositions in the original. So then only will original ideas and original thoughts flow through you. So that was your catalyst when you read the originals and when you translated them. I understand that really well, Lavanyaji, because such has been my journey also. It has only been after learning Sanskrit and after reading. For me, of course, I am more fond of the Ramayana, but be that as it may, it is only when you read the originals and you read them as a practicing Hindu that you get very different and new ideas about everything. It's not as if we want to reject everything that has been done. We will read it. We will see if it makes any sense to us, as you yourself have done. You have written a lot about what other people have written, and you have not rejected everything. That which needed to be rejected has to be rejected. And that which needs to be written anew has to be written anew. So that has been, this is a start. I hope you will write many more books and many more books on our epics. I hope all the people who are listening, all those who are writers, authors, please write many more books. I myself am writing a book on the modern women of ancient India, so historical role models. So this has been a really wonderful conversation. And before we end, we have one question in the Q&A box. So maybe you will take it, Lavanyaji. I will just read out the question.
Sure, yes, please.
This question is from Usha Lakshmanan. She says, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I was wondering whether the essence of the qualities represented by the 11 Devis is still present in contemporary India, despite invasions by foreigners and colonization. If it has not continued to persist to the present times, why might that be? How can the stories of the 11 Devis, amongst others, from an Indic perspective, be used to revive? She means to revive the qualities represented by the 11 Devis. So how do we revive those qualities if they are not still present?
Thank you. Thank you for the great question, Ushaji. The great qualities we have already discussed, the strength of mind, the commitment to their goals, the strength to achieve their goals. That's part of the value system of all the women that we have studied. Even if it entails exile and all that, do I see it in the present day women? Yes. I see in the present day Indian women the same kind of struggles, Same kind of victories, same kind of journeys, exiles. I have met many women who have been through difficult journeys, made it in life, came forward to tell their stories. It is there. Some are, of course, still scared, still living in their exiled and shadowed life. Of course, takes time, but they will come out, and we are seeing more and more women achievers, more and more successful women. They're all coming out and telling their stories, and some of them are also being made into films. You might have seen some. Some of them are becoming marathoners, some of them are becoming pilots, some of them are becoming great leaders, entrepreneurs. So, and writers like Sumedha ji. So, the point is that we are taking the journeys. We are making our journey. Of course, what we achieve, what we'll do, depends on our karma. But we are all taking this. So I will say it is there. The value system is still alive. We need to support our women more. The Beti Bachao, already we are doing. So I'm hoping to see more of Women Shakti in action. It's beginning, but I'm hoping to see more of it in action. And we have inspirational women to guide us, so we are on the right path.
So thank you, Lavanya ji. I completely agree with you. I think all those things are still there within us, because this is part of our traditions. This is part of what we have received from our mothers and our mothers' mothers. So, the Mahabharata is our roots. The Devis of the Mahabharata are our roots. So they definitely exist in us. All we need to do is rediscover it. And it is through writing, like you're doing, writing and thinking anew, reading anew, that we will be able to reach our roots. And that is what Indic feminism is about. That is what your book is about. So we've had this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And I think now it's over to Ram for a lineup of the next events of Indica USA.
Thank you, Madam. Yeah, this is Ram here. We had a wonderful conversation with Dr. Lavanya today. Along similar lines, we have lined up few more events next week. Coinciding with the October's, the Hindu Heritage Celebration here in the US, we're organizing a webinar on October 30th. That's one event that's coming up next week. 2 weeks from then on, we have another interesting conversation with Sai Deepa, which is on November 13th. I would call on all our audience to follow our social media handles, note down the dates, mark your calendars, register yourself, attend these webinars, and show your support for Indic causes. That would be it, Doctor. Over to you.
Thank you, Ram, and everyone. Please log in and please join these webinars. We've come to the end of this wonderful conversation, to the end of this webinar, and Nishant will now give us the vote of thanks.
So, namaste everyone, Nishant Limbachia here. Thank you everyone, all the audience members for joining first of all. Thank you, Ambassador Arun Kumar Sahuji, for gracing the occasion. Thank you, Professor Ramsani, for writing this important book. I know Indica is trying to get it published pretty soon, so people will be able to read more about it in near future. Sumedha ji, thank you very much once again for agreeing to do this and conducting it a wonderful session. And I know you've written a very wonderful review on Indica today, so I would encourage people to go and read that review as well. And Harikiran ji, as always, he has been always a pillar of support for us, guiding us through all that. So as always, Harikiran ji, I know you are not here, but again, thank you very much. And thank you, Ram and Avtanspai. As always, we are a team here in Chicago, so we try to coordinate and bring as good a content as we can for our audience here. And finally, our support staff in India. Koti Ramprasad ji, Srinivas ji, Raghavendra ji, Anuj, for doing all the flyers and all the organizing the Zoom and FB Live and all that for us. So thank you, audience, again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Pranam and Shubhratri, wherever you are.
Thank you. Pranam to everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste, everyone.
Namaste and thank you.